Welcome to National Open University of Nigeria, Noun tutorial. Today we will be giving attention to GST 201, Nigerian Peoples and Culture. My name is Dan Asukwo. If you are a Noun student or from any other universities, this will be very useful for you. Do well to share with others as well as on your study groups. If this is your first time of coming across our videos, why not do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share for others too to benefit. Today we are discussing Unit 1 titled The Peoples of Southern Nigerian and Their Culture in Pre-Colonial Times, Part 1, 1.0 Introduction. Nigerian Peoples and Culture is a very interesting and exciting study. It is one of the best channels that will help you have a sound knowledge and understanding of Nigeria and its peoples, especially in pre-colonial times. These are the Yoruba, the Bini, and the Igbo. 2.0 Objectives. At end of this unit, you should be able to know who the Yoruba, know who the Bini, know who the Igbo, discuss their origins, understand their culture or way of life, understand their socio-political organization, know the similarities and dissimilarities among them. 3.0 Main Content. 3.1 Major ethnic groups of southern Nigeria. We can identify among several others at least 606 major ethnic groups in southern Nigeria. These are the Yoruba, the Bini, the Igbo, the Itsekiri, the Urhobo, and the Ijaw. However, the first three are our main concern in this unit. Self-assessment exercise. Who are the major ethnic groups of southern Nigeria that, 3.2. The Yoruba. In a nutshell, the Yoruba can be described as one of the major ethnic groups in southern Nigeria. Of course, several members of the Yoruba race can be found everywhere around the globe, but the majority of them are found in some western and central states of Nigeria, stretching across Oyo, Osun, Ogun, Ondo, Lagos, Kwara, and Kogi. They practice both Islam and Christianity, but most of them are still traditionalist to the core. The Yoruba ethnic group is believed to have come into existence between 2000 to 1000 BC. Self-assessment exercise. Use your own words to describe who the Yoruba are. 3. 2.1 Origins of the Yoruba. Till today, the history of the origins of the Yoruba people remains controversial. The Yoruba as an ethnic group still holds many versions about its origins. Reverend Samuel Johnson's version. In his book History of the Yoruba, 1950, Johnson traces the origin of the Yoruba to the east. According to him, the Yoruba originally came from the northeastern area of Africa. The similarities between the cultures of the Yoruba and the Egyptians in terms of religious observances, works of arts, burial, and other traditional practices are enough evidence. It is from Egypt, after several years of journey, that the Yoruba finally settled in Ile-Ife in Nigeria. Oduduwa is believed to be the first leader that led the Yoruba to Ile-Ife and subsequently sent his sons and grandsons to found other Yoruba kingdoms. Johnson's conclusion is worth recalling. That the Yoruba came originally from the east, there cannot be the slightest doubt, as their habits, manner and customs, etc., all go to prove. With them the east is Mecca and Mecca is the east. Having strong affinities with the east looming so largely in their imagination, everything that comes from the east with them comes from Mecca, and hence it is natural to present themselves as having hailed originally from that city. The Oke Oramfe's version. Oke Oramfe is located in Ile-Ife. It is believed to be the center from which the world was created. In their paper, Yorubaland up to 1800, Akinjogbin and Amp, Ayandel, 1980, give us a full picture of what Oke Oramfe's version is all about. According to the legend, there was a period when the world was covered by water. The Almighty God then decided to send some of his messengers to the world, and they included Obatala, or Orisa Nla, or Orisa Alase, as the leader, and 16 Oye immortals. They were given 5 pieces of iron, a lump of earth tied to a white piece of cloth, and a cockerel. Somewhere on their way to the world, the leader, Obatala, got drunk with palm wine. Oduduwa seized the symbol of authority from him and eventually led the party to the world. The site on which they landed is traditionally known as Oke Oramfe in Ile-Ife. On arrival at the site, Oduduwa set down the 5 pieces of iron and placed the lump of earth on them. The cockerel then spread its toes on the earth. Consequently, the earth was formed, and Oduduwa thus became the ruler. It was from this base, Ife, that he extended his authorities to other Yoruba towns and villages. Now to the self-assessment exercise. The origin of the Yoruba ethnic group is still controversial. Discuss. The socio-political organization of the Yoruba. Oyo is best known as the major kingdom that eventually emerged as an empire in Yoruba land. Various traditions believe that Oyo was founded by Oranmiyan, the son of Oduduwa, who is also credited with establishing the present Benin monarchy. Oyo Empire was founded in the middle of the 15th century. A century later, it became very powerful and prosperous, extending its authority as far as Dahomey. The Alafin administration. Oyo Empire was very unique and exceptional in its system of government. For instance, in the 16th century, Oyo was one of the rare empires that had inbuilt checks and balances, and this contributed to its stability for centuries. The Alafin was the head of the empire and was resident in the capital. He was also regarded as lord of many lands. The Alafin was assisted in his administration by a retinue of officials made up of priests, officials, and eunuchs. He had a well-organized court as well. Theoretically, the Alafin was the fountain of authority and was therefore regarded as the companion of the gods. Sometimes he had an autocratic tendency, but in practice his powers were often limited and regulated by the Oyomesi, a council of 7 members headed by Bashoran, who acted as the prime minister. The members of Oyomesi were kingmakers as well. At the demise of the Alafin, they were the ones to select his successor. The Oyomesi also had the power to remove any Alafin, especially when he appeared dictatorial or transgressed the laws of the land. Usually the deposed Alafin was expected to commit suicide. The Ogboni cult's administration. Apart from the Alafin cabinet, members of the Oyomesi cult constituted another arm of government. It was a very powerful cult. It was composed of free and prominent members of the society as well as members of the Oyomesi. The Ogboni cult had a very vital position in Yoruba society. It played a mediatory role in any conflict between the Oyomesi and the Alafin. It was a kind of counterpower to the Oyomesi as well. The army. The army was another arm of government in traditional Yoruba society. It was very organized. Its head was conferred with the coveted title of Are Ona Kankanfo. It was made up of infantry and cavalry. They Are Ona Kankanfo was expected to live outside the capital. The army was credited with performing important functions, which included stability of the empire, expansion, as well as keeping dissident territories in check. Oyo Empire also had provincial governments. They were modeled after the central government. They were administered by princes, minor kings, and bails, provincial governors. All of them were subject to the overlordship of the Alafin. The provincial governments enjoyed considerable autonomy. But the Alafin had personal agents, Ilari, all over the provinces. The Alafin used the Bera annual festival periods to acknowledge the renewal of allegiance of the provincial governors to him. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the socio-political organization of the traditional Yoruba. 3.3. The Bini. It is obvious that the Bini, more than any other ethnic group, have played major roles in the history of Nigeria. For instance, the Bini were the first to be visited by the Europeans as early as 1472 AD. According to Hodgkin, the second half of the 15th century witnessed the arrival of the first Europeans to Benin. For instance, a Portuguese, Rui de Sequeira, arrived during Iwari's reign in 1472, while Alfonso de Aveiro arrived during Ozolua's reign in 1484. The Benin Kingdom was also the first in the west coast of Africa to exchange ambassadors with a major European power, the Portuguese. This was between 1481 and 1504. Self-assessment exercise. Who are the Bini people? 3.1 Origins of Benin Kingdom. The Egarevba's version. Just as other Nigerian peoples, the Bini have various traditions of origin. Egarevba, 1968 for instance, claims that the Bini people emigrated from Egypt and in the course of their journey southward, settled at Ile-Ife before finally arriving at their present location. Igbafe's version. Another tradition has it that the Bini peoples have been living in the area from the very beginning. According to Bini mythology, Bini was the youngest child of Osanobua, the high god. He and his brothers, who included the king of Ife, were sent to live in the world. They were asked by the high god to take whatever they wanted along with them to the world. While others chose wealth, magical skills, and material well-being, the youngest, on the advice of a bird, chose a snail shell. On arrival, they found that the world was covered by water. Following instruction from the bird, the youngest child overturned the snail shell, whereupon sand poured out of it and covered a large part of the water to form land. Thus, the first ruler of Bini became the owner of the land. Land made him powerful and wealthy, as he had to sell portions of it to his elder brothers, who then became his subjects. Ogiso's version. The first period of pre-colonial Bini history is known as the Ogiso era. This is because their rulers were the Ogisos, which means kings of the sky. The first Ogiso was known as Igbodo. He was succeeded by Er, who is credited with forming the guild system and laying solid foundation for the kingdom. Er was succeeded by Orire, who himself was succeeded by a number of Ogisos, among whom were women. The last Ogiso was Owodo. History tells us that Owodo was the one that clashed with the nobles and eventually became a victim of intrigues of his wives. This led to the banishment of his only son and heir apparent, Ekaladeran. Ekaladeran founded Ugaton, a port town in Benin. He later moved to Ife through Erua, where he spent the rest of his life. Many years later, because of a serious political crisis in Benin, the nobles sent for him to come back and rule over them. But it was too late. Ekaladeran was very old and decided to send his youngest son, Oranmiyan, Omanoyan, equal-sign pampered child, who came and established the Iweka dynasty. With the end of Ogiso dynasty, Benin went through a period of interregnum, during which the elders established a form of republican government headed by Evian, who eventually attempted to usurp the throne by nominating his son Ogiaman to succeed him. However, as Evian was not an Ogiso, the Benin people rejected his son Ogiaman. This situation led to a serious political crisis in the Bini kingdom. During the crisis, two factions emerged. One, the pro-monarchy, and two, the pro-Ogiaman, also known as Republicans. This stalemate forced the elders to send a delegation to the Uni of Ife, requesting him to send somebody to Benin to rule over them. The request was granted, and Oranmiyan, one of the Uni's sons, was sent to rule the Benin people. But on his arrival to Benin Kingdom, Oranmiyan found the Bini people ungovernable. So he decided to go back to Ife. However, on his way back, history tells us that Oranmiyan had an affair with a Bini woman, the daughter of Enogi of Igo Erinwinda. The woman became pregnant and eventually gave birth to a child who later became Iweka Wast. He is credited with establishing the present Bini dynasty. A recent version of this episode by some Bini elites maintains that Oranmiyan, who came from Ife to establish the present monarchy, was a Bini prince. According to them, Oranmiyan was the son of Ekaladeran, who had earlier been banished from Benin and who subsequently settled at Ile-Ife and eventually became the ruler, Oduduwa. Before Oranmiyan got back to Ife, he said of the Bini kingdom, "The country is a land of vexation, Ile Ibinu, and only a child born, trained and educated in the arts and mysteries of the land, could reign over the people." It was this son of Oranmiyan, born by a Bini woman who was subsequently trained and educated in the arts and mysteries of the land, that eventually ascended the throne with the name Iweka Thus. Iweka I thus became the first Oba of Benin, and his dynasty still reigns in Benin till today. The overall position of the Bini elites is that although Oranmiyan came from Ile-Ife, the monarchy which he established is indigenous to the Bini because he, Oranmiyan, was the son of a Benin prince, and his son, Iweka Thirst, was conceived, born and brought up in Benin. There is no doubt that to them, the present monarchy is indigenous to the Bini. But more research is still needed to ascertain the veracity of this version. Coincidentally, Iweka Y had a long and glorious reign. He had many children who were sent to villages as enojis. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the origins of the Bini people. 3.2. The socio-political organization of the Bini. As earlier mentioned, the Bini kingdom was the first in the west coast of Africa to exchange ambassadors with a major European power. This was between 1481 and 1504. At that time, the Bini kingdom was already socio-politically well organized. This is what Hodgkin, 1975, who visited Benin in 1604, declared, "The town seems to be very great. When you enter into it, you go into a great broad street, not paved, which seems to be 7 to 8 times broader than the Warmo Street in Amsterdam. Bini Kingdom had a unique political system, which centered on the Oba. He was the head of the kingdom, and succession to the throne was by primogeniture. That is, the first surviving son succeeded his father. To Jukun, the Oba was not only the civil head of state, he was also the religious head as well. He was in fact regarded as a divine person who in himself summed up the whole of the race. In him dwelt the divine spirit passed on to him from his forebears. Jukun, 1975. The Bini society was classified into 2 distinct classes. 1. The nobility Adesotu, and 2. The commoner, Igiotu. The nobility was organized into 303 groups of title holders: the Uzama, the Egayevbo and Ogbe palace chiefs, and the Egayevbo and Ore town chiefs. The ordinary people too, most especially those within the city, were organized into a number of guilds. The guilds were professional groups of the common people. There were a number of them, such as those of the carvers, brass workers, blacksmiths, doctors, butchers, etc. These guilds, most especially those that lived in defined quarters in the kingdom, had a system of administration which was the same as that of the villages. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the socio-political organization of the traditional Bini kingdom. 3.4. The Igbo. The Igbo people are best known for their segmentary or acephalous way of life. This is because from the ancient times they had no centralized states. Consequently, they operated a kind of government without kings. The Igbo are grouped into 5 subcultures: the Igbo of the eastern Nigeria, the Igbo of the southeastern Nigeria, the Igbo of the northeastern Nigeria, the western Igbo, and the northern Igbo. Generally, the Igbo are predominantly farmers and traders. Despite some cultural diversity among them, they do share a common basic culture in their language with a cluster of dialects that are mutually intelligible. They also share a common political system based on decentralization of power and delegation of authority exercised by the holders of the staff of authority, the OFO. Self-assessment exercise. 1. Use your own words to characterize the Igbo people. 2. How many subcultures exist in Igbo society? 3. 4.1 Origins of the Igbo. The origin of the Igbo people is as controversial as that of the Yoruba and the Bini. There are so many versions, and it is very difficult to say which is the most acceptable. The Middle East version. Some believe that the Igbo peoples migrated to their present location from either the north or the Middle East, the Igboland-centered version. Others believe that the Igbo people had been in their present abode from the beginning. Therefore, Igboland is the original homeland, the NRI version. Professor Emma Onwejogwu, 2000, regards the NRI version as the only authentic version of origin in existence in the oral tradition of the Igbo. According to NRI version, the ancestor of the Igbo, Eri, descended from the sky and sailed down the river Anambra. When he arrived at Aguleri, he met some autochthonous group of people who had no living memory of their own and settled with them. As their population increased, some groups migrated to other parts of Igboland to establish their own settlements, the Auca or Orlu version. Another tradition considered Auca or Orlu towns as the center of origin of the Igbo from where they dispersed to other areas. The Ida version. Some groups such as the Umunri claim to have migrated to their present location from Ida. The Benin version. The Onitsha and the Igbo on the other side of the river Niger, Delta Igbo, claim Benin origin. The Israeli version. One of the most popular versions of the migratory stories of origin of the Igbo people is the one that points to Israel. This assumption is based on the so-called similarities between the cultures of the Igbo and the ancient Hebrew. Some Igbo scholars consider themselves as offshoots of the lost tribes of the Hebrews who migrated southward. You should remember that the Igbo society has always been known as acephalous. Moreover, there were very limited professional historians as at that period. There were no equivalents of Oba and Alafin or of palaces over most parts of Igboland. This is why it is very difficult to reconcile all these various versions. Self-assessment exercise. 1. Discuss the Igbo origins. 2. Unlike the Yoruba and Bini, why are the versions of the origin of the Igbo more difficult to reconcile? 3. 4.2. the socio-political organization of the Igbo. Unlike other ethnic groups such as the Yoruba and the Bini, the Igbo people did not build any strong, centralized states. This is mainly because Igbo society had always been fragmentary or acephalous. In traditional Igbo, for instance, the village was the center of government. This has been described as direct democracy. The village-centered administration implied that every linkage, for instance, including all male adults in the village, participated in its political process. The Amala Oha. You should always remember that the socio-political organization of the traditional Igbo was fundamentally based either on the age grades or age and titled societies. Amala Oha was therefore a form of general assembly in traditional Igbo society. All the male adult members usually met in this assembly to perform legislative functions. In ancient times, the Amala Oha's meetings were held in the open village square. All the decisions taken during those meetings were absolute and final. As a democratic society, the life of every individual was highly respected. More so, the recognition of an individual in the society was based on individual capability and age rather than family background. The elders formed the core of village administration. They were highly respected accordingly. Hard-working and wealthy individuals were respected and given important responsibilities in the society as well. The youth, middle age, or able-bodied men and elders constituted age sets or age groups. You should remember that each age set had its own special rights, duties, obligations, and responsibilities in matters affecting the village. Self-assessment exercise. 1. What do you understand by a segmentary or acephalous society? 2. The Igbo traditional society has been described as direct democracy. Why? 4.0 Conclusion. This unit has dealt with the southern Nigeria peoples and their cultures, particularly in pre-colonial times. The Yoruba, the Bini, and the Igbo have been the main focus. It should be clear to you now that there is a kind of cultural shift from what happened to the traditional Yoruba, Bini, and Igbo to what we witness today. 5.0 Summary. In this unit, I introduced you to the southern Nigerian peoples and their cultures in pre-colonial times. I discussed and analyzed the first three major ethnic groups of the southern Nigeria, the Yoruba, the Bini, and the Igbo. Therefore, at the end of this unit, you are expected to be able to identify the Yoruba, identify the Bini, identify the Igbo, discuss the origins of these Nigerian peoples, explain their traditional culture or way of life, explain their traditional socio-political organizations, identify the similarities and dissimilarities among them, etc. 6.0 Tutor-marked assignment. 1. What do you know about the traditional Yoruba, Bini, and Igbo peoples and cultures? 2. Discuss any similarity and dissimilarity among them. Why not do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share for other too to benefit? We are discussing Unit 2, The Peoples of Southern Nigeria and Their Culture in Pre-Colonial Times, Part 2, 1.0 Introduction. This unit is the prolongation of the preceding one. Remember, we are still discussing the people of southern Nigeria and their culture in pre-colonial times. In Unit 1, we dealt with the first three major ethnic groups of southern Nigeria. This present unit focuses on the last three major ethnic groups of southern Nigeria. These are the Itsekiri, the Urhobo, and the Ijaw. 2.0 Objectives. At the end of this unit, you should be able to identify the Itsekiri, identify the Urhobo, identify the Ijaw, discuss their origin, explain their culture or way of life, identify the similarities and dissimilarities among them. 3.0 Main Content. 3.1 The Itsekiri. 3. 1.1 Origin of the Itsekiri people. Ijinua is known as the man through whom the kingdom of Itsekiri is said to have been established. History tells us that Ijinua was the son and heir apparent of Oba Oluwa of Benin in about 1473. You should remember that unlike the Yoruba, Bini, and Igbo peoples, the Itsekiri do not have many versions of their origin. According to the Itsekiri tradition, Ijinua at a time wrongly advised his father on a particular issue. The advice was so disastrous that Ijinua became very unpopular to the extent that his people vowed never to let him succeed his father. When his father, Oba Oluwa, noticed the seriousness of the anger of his people against his son, he decided to arrange a kingdom outside Benin for him. This was, according to him, the best way to avoid problems in his kingdom. According to the tradition, Ijinua was then sent with some chiefs and servants to an area by the sea to establish a kingdom of his own. On his arrival, Ijinua met with some Ijaws who took him along with his followers by canoe to an island where they finally settled. To most of the Itsekiri, this settlement is known as Itsekiri Kingdom till today. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the origin of the Itsekiri Kingdom. 3. 1.2. The socio-political organization of the Itsekiri people. The kingdom Ijinua founded was made up and is still made up of the Itsekiri, Ijaw, and a good number of other elements. Odi Itsekiri is the capital. Other settlements such as the Forcados, Escravos, and Benin rivers surround the capital. The socio-political organization of the Itsekiri people was very close to that of Benin Kingdom. The palace and titles, for instance, were modeled after that of Benin Kingdom. But in the Itsekiri case, the kingdom was ruled rather by the Olu. He alone presided over a council known as Ojoye, which was made up of 7 nobles or title holders. The Olu combined in himself spiritual and temporal powers. Self-assessment exercise. The socio-political organization of the Itsekiri kingdom was similar to that of the Benin kingdom. Discuss. 3.2 The Urhobo. 3. 2.1 Origin of the Urhobo people. Unlike the Itsekiri, the Urhobo people have more than one version of their origins. Ugeli, Agara, and Ogo version. According to Ugeli, Agara, and Ogo, the Urhobo people originated from the Ijaw. To them, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to culturally and historically differentiate the Urhobo from the Ijaw. Uwerun, Abraka, Agbon, Ugun, and Olomu version. To Uwerun, Abraka, Agbon, Ugun, Olomu, and many others, the Urhobo people are the product of the Benin immigrants. According to them, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to historically and culturally differentiate the Urhobo people from the Bini. Self-assessment exercise. Use your own words to discuss the origin of the Urhobo people. 3. 2.2. The socio-political organization of the Urhobo people. Just like the Itsekiri, the Urhobo people are found in the Niger Delta region. However, unlike the Itsekiri, the Urhobo are fragmented and live in different places in the Niger Delta area. This may be the reason why the Urhobo people, unlike the Itsekiri and Benin, have never established a single kingdom. Socio-politically speaking, each Urhobo village had its own traditional institution headed by a ruler, Ovi. Just like the Itsekiri, the socio-political organization of the Urhobo people was modeled after that of Benin Kingdom. The Ovi, for instance, had a court made of prominent individuals and title holders. Moreover, just like in Igboland, the adult male members of the Urhobo society were divided into age sets corresponding with youth, middle age, and elders. Of course, each of the age sets performed specific duties in the societies. Self-assessment exercise. Use your own words to discuss the socio-political organization of the Urhobo people. 3.3 The Ijaw. 3.2 Origin of the Ijaw people. As one of the major ethnic groups in the Niger Delta region, the Ijaw people share almost the same stories of origin with their Itsekiri and Urhobo counterparts. That is to say, there is no clear-cut demarcation on the history of the origin of the Ijaw from that of the Itsekiri and Urhobo. Self-assessment exercise. How can you characterize the origin of the Ijaw people? 3.2. The socio-political organization of the Ijaw people. Socio-politically speaking, the traditional Ijaw did not develop any centralized system of government. For some scholars, this might be so because the Ijaw was scattered in small fishing settlements in the creeks of the river Niger. The house system characterized Ijaw societies. Ijaw people were traders, especially fishermen. The traditional major Ijaw states were Bani, Kalabari, Ibrika, Opobo, and Brass Nembe. Self-assessment exercise. The socio-political organization of the traditional Ijaw was unique. Why? 4.0 Conclusion. This unit has dealt also with the southern Nigerian peoples and culture, specifically in pre-colonial times. The Itsekiri, the Urhobo, and the Ijaw have been the main focus. It should be clear to you by now that the Itsekiri, the Urhobo, and the Ijaw people are located in the Niger Delta region. You should also remember that although the Itsekiri, the Urhobo, and the Ijaw people have many things in common, They do have notable differences as well. It is also obvious that there is a kind of socio-cultural shift from what happened to the traditional Itsekiri, the Urhobo, and the Ijaw to what we witness today. 5.0 Summary. In this unit, I introduced you to the Part 2 of the peoples of southern Nigeria and their culture in pre-colonial times. I discussed and analyzed the three last major ethnic groups of the southern Nigeria, that is the Itsekiri, the Urhobo, and the Ijaw. Therefore, at the end of this unit, you are expected to know: identify the Itsekiri, identify the Urhobo, identify the Ijaw, discuss their origins, explain their traditional culture or way of life, explain their traditional/social political organization, explain the similarities and dissimilarities among them. 6.0 Tutor-marked assignment. 1. Discuss the origins of the traditional Itseki, Urhobo, and Ijaw. 2. Although the Itsekiri, Urhobo, and Ijaw are all from the Niger Delta area, discuss what differentiates them. Why not do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share for other too, to benefit? We will be discussing the Unit 3 titled The Peoples of Northern Nigeria and Their Culture in Pre-Colonial Times, Part 1. 1.0 Introduction. This study unit introduces you to the Part 1 of the peoples of Northern Nigeria and their culture in pre-colonial times. It focuses on the first three major ethnic groups found in the northern Nigeria, namely the Hausa, the Kanem-Bornu, and the Nupe. 2.0 Objectives. At the end of this unit, you should be able to identify the Hausa, identify the Kanem-Bornu, identify the Nupe, discuss their origins, explain their socio-political organization, explain the similarities and dissimilarities among them. 3.0 Main Content. 3.1 Major ethnic groups of northern Nigeria. We can identify at least six major ethnic groups in northern Nigeria. These are the Hausa, the Kanem-Bornu, the Nupe, the Igala, the Jukun, and the Tiv. However, the first three ethnic groups are the main concern of this study unit. Self-assessment exercise. Who are the major ethnic groups of northern Nigeria that you know? 3.2 The Hausa Fulani people. The Hausa people represent one of the important and politically dominant groups in northern Nigeria. By the year 2000, the Hausa population was estimated at about 20 million. They are also one of the largest linguistic groups in the whole of Africa. 3. 2.1 Origins of the Hausa. Just like other major ethnic groups in Nigeria, the origin of the Hausa people is not very certain. The Bayajida version. Most scholars agree that the Bayajida story is the most authentic oral tradition in Hausaland that attempts to explain the origin of the Hausa states. According to the legend, Bayajida is believed to be the founder hero of the Hausa states. He is also believed to have come from Baghdad to Kanem-Bornu and thence to Hausaland in present Nigeria. History tells us that Bayajida married the daughter of the Mai of Bornu, by whom he had a son at Biran. After a while, Bayajida left Biran to Daura. While in Daura, he helped to kill a snake, which had for a long time prevented the people from taking water from a well. According to the legend, the queen of Daura was very impressed and decided to marry him. They later had a son named Bawo. Bawo had 6 children who, together with Bayajida's other son at Biran, are believed to have founded the original 7 Hausa states, referred to as the Hausa Bokwoi. Self-assessment exercise. What do you know about the origin of the Hausa? 3. 2.2 The socio-political organization of the Hausa. The Sarki has always been known as the head of any typical Hausa state. He always works with a retinue of officials in a well-organized court. Sarkin Kasar, which means ruler of the land, was the full title given to any effective and efficient head of Hausa state. The Sarkin Kasar combined both political and religious spiritual functions. He was also the chief executive and judge of the state, but he was aided by a council of state. At the district level, the government was modeled after that at the national level. You should also know that between 14th and 15th centuries, the socio-political organization of Hausa states took another shape. For instance, Islam was adopted, and this gave birth to many new political institutions, such as the offices of the Galadima, Madawaki, Magaji, Dogari, Yari Sarki, and Sarki Yao. The Islamization of Hausaland also influenced its judicial system. The Sharia law started taking shape. Some new titles, such as alkali and qadis, judges, became commonplace in the administration of justice. Self-assessment exercise. Use your own words to describe the socio-political organization of the traditional Hausa. 3.3. The Kanem-Bornu people. Kanuri is the language that unites all the Kanem-Bornu people. 3.1 Origin of the Kanem-Bornu people. Kanem-Bornu ethnic group also has many versions of its origin, but all these versions are not certain. They are also known to have been exaggerated in the region northeast of the Lake Chad. The So version. Some scholars argue that the So people were the first settlers in Kanem-Bornu. According to them, the So had developed a sophisticated socio-political culture based on agriculture and the knowledge and use of iron technology. This happened long before the Zagawa, who later invaded the land, the Saif B. Diazan version. There is another tradition of the history of Kanem-Bornu, which attributes the foundation of Kanem-Bornu to the great Arab hero, Saif B. Diazan. This happened between 9th and 10th centuries. A.D. Yazan is also credited to have established the now famous Saifawa dynasty. You should remember that the Saifawa dynasty was one of the longest ruling dynasties in the pre-colonial West African sub-region. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the origin of the Kanem-Bornu people. 3.2. The socio-political organization of the Kanem-Bornu. It is very important to notice that the nucleus of the socio-political organization of the Kanem-Bornu people was based on kinship. For instance, the Mai, king, was the highest authority in the political structure. His mother, that is the Queen Mother, or Magira, was a very important and respected personage in the Kanem political structure as well. The king's sister was also very important. She was to assist the king in the day-to-day administration of Kanem, the Nokena. Besides the kinship-oriented political system of the Kanem people, there was an imperial state council known as the Council of the 12, or the Nokena. The principal duty of the Nokena was to offer the king useful advice. The Maini Kanendi was the chief judge of the state. He played a major role in the Kanem political structure. By his position, he was the Mai's legal advisor as well. The army. In the traditional Kanem-Bornu, the army played a vital role in the administration. The army was very professional. It was divided strategically into two divisions, a home division and a bush garrison. The titled nobility. The titled nobility was another institution within the Kanem-Bornu political structure. They are known to have exercised tremendous influence in the state and were assigned fiefdoms to administer. The most important of these were Galadima, Kaigama, Yerima, and Mishima. The servile institution. The servile was made of slaves and eunuchs. They are known to be important in the administration of the state. They also held offices like Mushemu, Yoroma, and Kachela. Self-assessment exercise. Use your own words to discuss the socio-political organizations of the Kanem-Bornu people. 3.4. The Nupe. Just like the Hausa Fulani, the early history of the Nupe people is not much known. What you should remember is that the pre-colonial Nupe people and state developed in the region of the Niger and Benue valleys of the Nigerian Middle Belt. The Nupe state was located on the north bank of the Niger at its confluence with the river Kaduna. Nupe land was located at the crossroads of trade from Borno to Kano axis in the northeast, as well as Yorubaland, Ganga, and Benin in the southwest. Gabara was its capital. It was located on the bank of the Kaduna River and was an important trading center as well. Gabara functioned as an entreport connecting Benin and Oyo trade with Nupe. 4.1 Origins of the Nupe people. Like any other ethnic group in Nigeria, the Nupe people also have various versions of origin. The Nupe-centered version. Some scholars believe that the early Nupe people originated where they presently occupy, the Egyptian version. Other elites argue that the first peoples of the Nupe came from Egypt. Therefore, Egypt was the origin of the Nupe people. The Ida version, Soedi or Edeji, is considered by some Nupe people as the founder of their state. And according to Nupe tradition, Soede might have arrived in the early 16th century from Ida. He, Trodade, is also believed to have had an Igala father and a Nupa mother, the Igala version. History tells us that the Nupi people had at a time paid allegiance and tribute to the Ata of the Igala state. To them, in the 16th century, a hero, an Ida prince known as Soadi, re-established Nupa's independence with himself as the Itesu Nupi, king of Nupaland. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the origin of Nupa people. 3. 4.2. The socio-political organization of the Nupa people. The Etsunupe was known as the head of the Nupe kingdom. He operated a two-level administration, central and provincial. History tells us that the Etsunupe enjoyed a divine status and people worshipped and respected him. His word was law. But the Etsunupe was not always absolute because his power and actions were regulated by a body of traditions and taboos. The nobility. Besides the Etsunupe, there was a class of powerful gentlemen called nobility. Its main task was to help the king in carrying out his duties as leader. There were nobilities such as the Shaba, Kpotu, and Maku. The Zitsu. In traditional Nupe land, each village was headed by the Zitsu. He was an appointee of the Etsu. The Zitsu was in turn assisted by a council of elders. The Zitsu always pays tribute to the Etsu in recognition of his authority. Self-assessment exercise. Use your own words to discuss the socio-political organization of the traditional Nupa. 4.0 Conclusion. This study dealt with the peoples of northern Nigeria and their culture in pre-colonial times. The Hausa, the Kanem-Bornu, and the Nupa have been the main focus. 5.0 Summary. In this study unit, I introduced you to the Part 1 of the peoples of northern Nigeria and their culture in pre-colonial times. I discussed and analyzed the three first major ethnic groups of northern Nigeria, the Hausa, the Kanem-Bornu, and the Nupe. Therefore, at the end of this unit, you are expected to identify the Hausa, identify the Kanem-Bornu, identify the Nupa, discuss their origins, explain their traditional culture or way of life, explain their traditional socio-political organization, identify the similarities and dissimilarities between them. 6.0 Tutor-marked assignment. 1. What do you know about the traditional Hausa, the Kanem-Bornu, and the Nupa? 2. Can you find any similarities or dissimilarities between them? 1.0 Introduction. This study unit introduces you to the Part 2 of Northern Nigeria peoples and culture in pre-colonial times. It will focus only on the last three ethnic groups found in the northern part of Nigeria, namely the Igala, the Jukun or Kwararafa, and the TIV. 2.0 Objectives. At the end of this unit, you should be able to identify the Igala, identify the Jukun or Kwararafa, identify the TIV, discuss their origins, explain their socio-political organization, explain the similarities and dissimilarities between them. 3.0 Main Content. 3.1 The Igala. 3. 1.1 Origin of the Igala. Like any other ethnic group in Nigeria, the origin of the Igala people is not clear. However, Ida has always been known as the capital state of Igala people. Abutu Eje version. History tells us that Abutu Eje was the first personality to seriously contribute to the development or evolution of the Igala state. Abutu Eje, sometimes identified as child reared by a leopard, Eje, or as a prince from Ado, Benin, or Apa Wukari Jukun, was a foreigner. According to the legend, the sovereignty was transferred to him from an aboriginal population, the Okpoto. Achadu version. Some Igala elites attribute the emergence of their state to one Achadu. He is believed to have come from the Igbo country. He married the Ata and later became a patron, ritual husband, and the leader of the kingmakers, Igala Mela, the Yoruba version. Some scholars also argue that the Igala are of a Yoruba extraction. Historical evidence exists to show that the territories of the Igala and some Yoruba-speaking peoples had been contiguous. Self-assessment exercise. Use your own words to discuss the origin of the Igala people. 3. 1.2 The socio-political organization of the Igala. Ayagba or Idoko is best known as the ancestor to all the Atas. He is also credited to have founded the present Igala dynasty. History tells us that he was the one who helped the Igala people to break away from the Jukun rule. Politically speaking, each Igala Mela was the head of any effective Igala territory. His administrative power was like that of the Uzama Nihiron of Benin or the Oyemisi of the Yoruba. The traditional Igala political structure was operated on two levels. There was the central and the provincial level of administration. The Ata was head of the center. A council of chiefs and other officials assisted him in the local or provincial administration of the kingdom. Self-assessment exercise. What do you know about the socio-political organization of the traditional Igala people? 3.2 The Jukun, Kwararafa. 3. 2.1 Origin of the Jukun. Again, like other ethnic groups in Nigeria, the origin of the Jukun people is not fixed. The Jukun are also known as the Kwararafa. They are believed to have occupied the area between the river Benue and the river Ibi in Gongola state. Wukari was also known as the principal town of the Jukun people, and it is in that town that their king resided. The Jukun state was large. The Kano Chronicle version. The Kano Chronicle version was the most authentic source that could say something convincing about the Jukun history of origin. According to records from the Kano Chronicle, the Jukun people raided the Hausaland and Bornu in the 16th and 17th centuries. This shows that although the origin of the Jukun people was almost unknown, they were at least in existence before the 16th century or thereabouts. Self-assessment exercise. What do you know about the origin of the Jukun people? 3. 2.2. The socio-political organization of the Jukun. As said earlier, the Jukun state was certainly not a small state. This is one of the reasons why Jukun was seen as a confederation of peoples who recognized the religious supremacy of the AKU-UKA. History tells us that by the end of the 17th century, the Jukun had been well established in the Middle Benue region. The Jukun people operated a theocratic system of government. AKU-UKA was the head of any effective Jukun state. He was believed to be spiritually appointed and was regarded as the representative of the gods on earth. Although AKU-UKA was very powerful, his system of government was not despotic. He had no absolute power over his people. There were many ways of regulating his power. According to Jukun tradition, AKU-UKA was judged, for instance, by his performance. Result. Since he was the symbol of the Jukun existence, a good harvest could bring in more prestige, while a bad harvest could result in serious calamity, and thereafter his unpopularity and downfall. Also, there were many taboos which acted as checks on his royal power as well. Even as the head of the executive, legislative, and judiciary, AKU-UKA also ruled with the advice of his nobles and subjects. Public opinion was respected in Jukun pre-colonial administration. Achuwo. He was the head of AKU-UKA's Council of Nobles. He functioned as the Prime Minister. He was seconded by the Abozaik, Kinda Achuwo, and the AKU Nako. You should also remember that these nobles were representatives of their lineages as well. Self-assessment exercise. Use your own words to describe the socio-political organization of the traditional Jukun people. 3.3. The TIV. P. Bohannon, 1953. In his book, The TIV of Central Nigeria, classifies the TIV people as the largest single ethnic group in the Middle Benue Basin of northern Nigeria. According to him, the southern and eastern portions of the TIV country, also called Ityo Kitterach, lie among the foothills of the Cameroon Highlands and the Sonkwala or Sankwura Hills of the Obudu Hills territory. These regions are flanked by the Alago and Jukunized group on the north, the Basta and other Cameroon groups like the Undir and Iyon on the south and southeast, with the Jukun and Chamba to the west. Of course, they presently occupy the TIV local government areas of Buraka, Gaboko, Gwer West, Gumu, Kwande, Katasina Ala, Konshisha, Vandekia, Ukun, Ushonyo, and Mukurdi. 3.1. Origin of the TIV. Needless to say again that the origin of the TIV people is not certain. What we know about their origin came from oral traditions of myths and legends and theories of migration. TIV version. According to the TIV oral tradition, it was TIV, as a person, that founded the TIV ethnic group of today. So the word TIV refers both to the language and founding father of the group. Swem version. Other traditions argue that earlier settlements of the ethnic group came from Swem down to their present location through Nwanga and Ibinda, and this occurred between the 16th and 17th centuries. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the origins of the traditional TV ethnic group. 3.2. The socio-political organization of the TIV. Again, P. Bohannon, 1953, argues that the socio-political system of the traditional TV was very unique. It was a classic example of segmentary or largely decentralized system of government in pre-colonial and post-colonial Nigeria ever studied. Sombor. Sombor was the name of the family group and was the largest recognized entity as well. Mbavesin, elder. Mbavesin or elder was the head of a unit. You should remember that in TIV traditional system, each family group was in turn divided into smaller units. You should also remember that the TIV attached much importance to the spirit of brotherhood and mutual relations because of the belief that all of them were from one father and therefore from one lineage. For Bohannon, 1953, the TIV's socio-political structure was so simple that it was difficult to understand. According to him, TIV society was very much segmented. It was a hierarchical society. It started with the individual at the lowest level, the family, the extended family, the kindred, and through clan to TIV, that is the whole tribe. In TIV society, more than in any other Nigerian ethnic group, genealogical affiliation was very strong. Even today, in traditional TIV society, it is upon this kind of genealogical framework of hierarchy that kinship relationship is organized. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the socio-political organization of the traditional TIV. 4.0 conclusion. This study unit has dealt with the northern Nigerian peoples and culture, particularly in pre-colonial times. The Igala, Kwararafa, and TIV have been the main focus. 5.0 summary. In this study unit, I introduced you to the part 2 of the peoples northern Nigeria and their culture in pre-colonial times. I discussed and analyzed the last 3 major ethnic groups of the northern Nigeria, that is the Igala, the Kwararafa or Jukun, and the TIV. Therefore, at the end of this unit, you are expected to know who are the Igala, the Jukun or Kwararafa, the TIV. Discuss their origins. Understand their traditional culture or way of life. Understand their traditional socio-political organization. Know the similarities and dissimilarities among them, etc. 6.0 tutor-marked assignment. 1. What do you know about the traditional Igala, Jukun, and TV? 2. Can you find any similarities or dissimilarities between them? Why not do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share for other too to benefit? Today we will be discussing the Unit 5 titled The Dynamics of the Evolution of Nigeria as Political Unit 1.0 Introduction. This study unit intends to introduce you to the dynamics of the evolution of Nigeria as a political unit. It will focus mainly on the different stages Nigeria as a country passed through, especially under the British colonial masters. 2.0 Objectives. At the end of this unit, you should be able to state with accuracy when Nigeria as a country became independent sovereign nation and later became a republic. State who the first Europeans to arrive Nigeria. Explain the constitution of the British in the creation of Nigeria. Explain about the Nigerian nationalism. Identify some major problems left by the colonialists. Explain if Nigeria as a country is a vital political unit. 3.0 Main content. 3.1 The British and the creation of Nigeria. You should know that the British, who have often been credited with the creation of Nigeria, were not the first Europeans to land in Nigeria. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to arrive Nigeria through Benin Kingdom. According to Hodgkin, the second half of the century, 15th, saw the arrival of the first Europeans in Benin, the Portuguese Rui de Sequeira in 1472 in Iware's reign, and Alfonso de Aveiro in 1484 in Ozolua's reign. 3. 1.1 The Transatlantic Slave Trade. The transatlantic slave trade was the unfortunate channel that first put the British in contact with Nigeria. The trade got to maturity in the 16th century. For close to 3 centuries, coastal Nigeria's relations with the British were dominated by the transatlantic slave trade. But in the early decade of the 19th century, the British decided to abolish the transatlantic slave trade. They did so through the operations of the British West African Naval Squadron. You should know that it is tautological to say that the trade was very damaging to Africa in general and Nigeria in particular. 3. 1.2 The Period of Legitimate Commerce. After 3 centuries of shameful slave trade came the so-called period of legitimate commerce. Of course, this was another golden opportunity for the Europeans to get more directly involved in the affairs of the African states. Europeans first introduced the gunboat politics. To them, this was important because some erring African states were threatened with attack, and in some cases were actually attacked. It was under the umbrella of such happenings that the British first formally annexed Nigerian territory. In 1861, they took Lagos as a colony, but the bulk of Nigerian territory was occupied in the late 19th century. This happened through dubious treaties that were signed with some Nigerian potentates and through military conquest of states and deportation of their rulers. Despite the resistance of some brave and courageous Nigerians such as Jaja of Opobo, Nana of Itsekiri, Ovonramwen of Benin, and Atahiru of Sokoto, they could not stop the British usurpation of their independence and authority. Self-assessment exercise. Discuss the relationship between the creation of Nigeria and the British colonial rule. 3.2. The amalgamation processes. Before the year 1900, all the different parts of Nigeria conquered by the British were still under their original administration. But by 1900, the whole Nigeria was under the responsibility of the British Colonial Office. 3.2. The 1st of May 1906 amalgamation. The May 1906 amalgamation is known as the first ever amalgamation of the British in Nigeria. British government amalgamated Lagos Colony and Protectorate with the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria to form the new colony and Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. You should know that since the whole Nigeria was under the responsibility of the British government, they did not bother to seek the views of Nigerians in the two territories as to whether or not they supported the amalgamation. Besides, Tamuno, 1980, observes that the primary aim of the 1906 amalgamation was purely economic, that is, to use the better financial position of the Protectorate of Southern Nigerian to cover the costs of administration and development in the financially weak colony and Protectorate of Lagos, then saddled with the white elephant of a railway in need of extension since 1901. 3.2. The 2nd of January 1914 amalgamation. The second amalgamation was that of 1914. In January 1914, the British government amalgamated northern and southern Nigeria. The principal reason for this is the same as that of May 1906. The Northern Protectorate was not as economically buoyant as the colony and Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. That was why, for the British imperial offices, since the southern trade was booming, amalgamation would allow the surpluses acquired in the south to be used in the north, and this was expected to reduce British Treasury responsibility. Sir Frederick Lugard, later became Lord, is best known as the father of the January 1914 amalgamation. 2.3. Some consequences of the amalgamation. It can be argued that even if the initial intention of the amalgamation process was to make of Nigeria a political unit, it did practically fail. According to Hatch, 1970, the amalgamation of Nigeria was carried out with many unanswered questions such as, what would be the effect of uniting the Fulani Emirates with their comparatively static traditionalist outlook, with the thrusting, competitive, individualistic society of the South now acquiring knowledge from a growing number of mission schools, which were making available an expanding clerical class? How would societies that only a few years earlier had been rival and often hostile states live together under one administration? Should they form a single nation? If so, how could a single allegiance be created? In any case, what was the central objective of British policy? Was it to build an empire permanently subordinate to Britain, to act as a trustee for some shadowy African future, or to encourage a natural spirit leading to ultimate self-government? p. 55. Today, it is obvious that the tragedy of Nigeria's history and its people is not so much to be found in the diversity of these groups that were brought together under amalgamation. Rather, the real tragedy is that British colonial policy in Nigeria after amalgamation tended to be divisive and isolationist in terms of keeping the peoples of the two main protectorates separate. For instance, while the 1914 amalgamation gave the northern and southern provinces a common political head in the person of Lugard, No uniform style of administration developed in either group of provinces. Despite the amalgamation of 1914, Nigeria still operated as a federation of two groups of provinces between 1914 and 1939. Later, on April 1, 1939, the British government split the former southern provinces into eastern and western provinces. This tripartite division of Nigeria remained well into the independence period until 1963, when the Midwestern region was created, and the northern region was split for the first time in 1967. Self-assessment exercise. What role did the amalgamations play in the evolution of Nigeria as a political unit? 3.3 Nigerian peoples and the colonial predicament. You should always remember that colonial rule was forcibly imposed on the people of Nigeria. As stated earlier, colonial intention has never been for the benefit of Nigerian people. It was exploitative, and this engendered protests from prominent Nigerians. The pursuit of economic goals was their catalyst. The British were busy looking for cheap raw materials and creating markets for the sale of their finished products. In doing that, their objectives became clear. They pursued policies which in their entire ramification were geared towards the economic, political and social benefits of the British overlords. 3.1. The Nigerian nationalism. It is obvious that the British colonial rule alienated Nigerians at different levels. Nigerians became foreigners in their own country. For instance, it became very difficult, if not impossible, for them to effectively participate in both the economic and governmental processes of their own country. The immediate result to such unfortunate situation was the birth of Nigerian nationalism. Like in other parts of Africa, some brave Nigerians stood up and decided to champion the cause for reforms in the system. The Nigerian nationalism was welcome both in the country and abroad. Three major trends characterized the strength of nationalistic spirit. A. The people's protest against the colonial system in their desire to alter the existing colonial system so that they could benefit from it. B. The activities of black diasporas in the New World, the Americas, such as Marcus J. Garvey and Wilmot Blyden, who were exponents of the dignity of the African person. And 3. The presence of an articulate class of Nigerian elites who, through their acquisition of Western education, were in the vanguard of those agitating for change in the status quo. The West African Pilot and Garvey's The Negro World. These are the most prominent newspapers that contributed seriously to the emergence of Nigerian nationalism. Besides, some other factors also contributed to the Nigerian nationalism: the development of political parties and the election of the Labour Party in Britain with its anti-colonialism agenda. Nigeria became independent on October 1, 1960, the Nigerian Youth Movement, NYM. This movement is best known as the first true nationalist organization that emerged in Nigeria in 1936. It was headed by Samuel Akinsanya, H.O. Davies, Ernest Ikoli, and Dr. J.C. Vaughan. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe and Chief Obafemi Awolowo later joined the movement in 1937, the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons. This movement was created on the 26th of August 1944. It was headed by Herbert Macaulay as president and Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe as its secretary. In 1945, the movement made one of its aims very clear: to achieve internal self-government for Nigeria, whereby the people of Nigeria and the Cameroons under British mandate shall exercise executive, legislative, and judicial power. The Igbo domination within the party brought in a feeling of resentment. The true nationalist spirit started giving way to tribal interest. On this note, the Action Group, AG, was founded in 1948 by Obafemi Awolowo to defend the interest of the Yoruba. A year later, 1949, the Northern People's Congress, NPC, was formed by Malam Aminu Kano and Malam Abubakar Tafawa Balewa to defend the interests of the Northerners. There is no doubt that the establishment of these tribal-oriented political organizations turned out to be strong centrifugal forces against Nigerian unity. According to Olusanya, 1980, 568, with the formation of the AG and the NPC, ethnic nationalism and regional divisions triumphed over the forces of unity in Nigerian politics. 3.2 Nigerian independence and constitutions. The final declaration of the Nigerian independence on October 1, 1960, was also the result of the major constitutions, namely the Richards Constitution of 1946, the McPherson Constitution of 1951, and the Littleton Constitution of 1954, the 1954 Constitution. The McPherson Constitution was the most comprehensive and did not live long. The need for its revision became necessary. The revision led to the promulgation of the Littleton Constitution of 1954 that remains the cornerstone of the Nigerian Constitution till date. The 1954 Constitution established a federal system of government for Nigeria. It is also believed that the 1954 Constitution marked the end of nationalist struggle for independence. You should also remember that even when Nigeria attained her independence, there were still deep fissures within the structure. Ethnicism and tribalism were the most prominent, along with the feeling of marginalization by minority groups in different areas. 3.3 Is Nigeria a vital political unit? Bearing the socio-historical evolution of Nigeria in mind, the question whether Nigeria is a real political unit cannot receive a complete no or yes answer. The answer will depend on the person's angle of analysis. For some scholars, the Federation of Nigeria is a mistake. They argue that Nigeria is a conglomerate of various ethnic groups, and during the pre-colonial period, those ethnic groups never interrelated. So it was futile to put such people together. Therefore, the unity of Nigeria is just a mere concept or a slogan. Although there are some elements of truth in this thesis, some scholars still argue the opposite. According to Ikeme, 1985, and Ajayi and Alagoa, 1980, Nigeria can be seen as a real political unit. They argue that there were fruitful intergroup relations between the people of Nigeria before colonial rule. They also argue that the common experience of colonial rule by the peoples of Nigeria provided good grounds for building a nation. This was also the case with the British 13 America colonies that later formed the United States of America with their Declaration of Independence in 1776. Self-assessment exercise. Nigeria is not a vital political unit. Discuss. 4.0 Conclusion. This study dealt with the socio-historical analysis of the evolution of Nigeria as a political unit. We have seen how the dynamics of such evolution passed through different stages, mostly engineered by British colonial masters. 5.0 Summary. In this study unit, I introduced you to the knowledge of the different stages of the evolution of Nigeria as a political unit. Therefore, at the end of this unit, you are expected to mention the first Europeans to arrive in Nigeria. State the contribution of the British in the creation of Nigeria. Explain about the different amalgamations that occurred in Nigeria. Explain about the Nigerian nationalism. Identify some unanswered questions left by the colonialists. State if Nigeria is a vital political unit, etc. 6.0 Tutor-marked assignment. 1. Use your own words to discuss the evolution of Nigeria as a political unit. 2. Is Nigeria a vital political unit?